everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today I'll be dipping my toes into the water of true crime, so please excuse my unprofessionalism. The case I'll be covering is the tale of David Parker Ray, or the Toy Box Killer, which is a man who killed over 60 women supposedly and was never convicted of murder. Now, with the introductions out of the way, let's get right into the video.
I'm going to tell you in detail why you have been kidnapped, what's going to happen to you, and how long you'll be here.
David Ray was born on November 6, 1939 in Belen, New Mexico as the first son of the Ray family. David's early life was rough. Living with his grandfather and younger sister Peggy, their dad and mom were mostly absent besides infrequent visits from their father. When David's father did visit, he would give his son sadomasochistic adult magazines, as well as beating David and his sister. The psychological abuse continued all throughout David's school life, as he was bullied and teased by the other children for his social reclusivity, especially around women his age. As his life dragged on into his teenage years, his sadomasochistic and disturbing fantasies developed in him, as well as his future accomplice, his sister. Following his high school life, he soon joined the U.S. military, that of which he was later honorably discharged for an unspecified reason. His murder and kidnapping spree began soon after this, around the 1960s.
What all this amounts to is that you're going to be kept naked and chained up like an animal, to be used and abused at any time we want to, in any way that we want to.
In March of 1999, a 22-year-old woman by the name of Cynthia was detained and arrested by a man claiming to be a police officer under the charges of sex work and hooking. She was then violently thrown in the back of the man's car before he took off into the night. The young woman was then taken to a trailer the man called his quote-unquote toy box. This man being David Parker Ray. After being brought to his toy box, she was strapped down and tortured for 3 days consecutively by David and his girlfriend at the time, Hindi. David used tools like whips and electric shock therapy to abuse her into submission. He showed her previously recorded videotapes of him describing what he would do to her and how he would discard her body like the rest.
You might as well start getting used to it, because you're going to be kept here and used until such time as we get tired of f***ing around with you. And we will, eventually, in a month or 2. Maybe 3. It's no big deal.
On the 4th day of Cynthia's captivity, Hindi was leaving the house with David, as she left the keys to the room on a table near Cynthia. Taking her only chance at escape, she lunged for the keys and fled, bloodied and abused. And in a fit of desperation, she knocked on the door of a nearby mobile home and was taken in. This story was the first time the supposed toy box killer was ever brought under the spotlight. Following this tragic event, 2 other victims came forward, Kelly Garrett and Angelica Montano. Angelica Montano was an acquaintance of David, and on one dark day came to his house for some cake mix he offered. This was just a ploy by David, of course. The next thing Angelica knew, she found herself in the middle of a highway in the desert. What David did in the meantime was severely disturbing. She was drugged with a cocktail of sodium pentothal and phenobarbital. While she was dazed and confused, he ripped and beat her severely before releasing her into the desert. That's all the information we have on the Angelica Montano case. Kelly Garrett was a friend of David Ray's daughter, Jessie. One night, Kelly got into an argument with her then husband and decided to spend the night at a bar with Jessie to blow off some steam. After a long night of drinking and playing pool, Jessie was pretty dazed and exhausted, and it all just faded to black. Kelly woke up in absolute horror as she found herself in David's toy box. Little did she know, Jessie was an accomplice to David and had roofied her drink. This attack was planned and calculated, all to lead Kelly to this location. David and Jessie took turns torturing and molesting the former friend for 2 days non-stop. After being through hell and back, David slit the woman's throat and dumped her in a ditch, thinking she was dead. But contrary to his beliefs, she survived the attack and escaped back to her husband. She had little recollection of the events due to her sedation. However, she stated that she did recall being raped. Shockingly, her husband nor the police believed her. In fact, her husband simply believed she was out cheating on him that night and later filed for divorce, which is rough. Wow.
The FBI is seeking information regarding any possible victims of David Parker Ray, who died in state prison in New Mexico in 2002 while serving a 223-year sentence for kidnapping.
On March 23, 1999, David and his girlfriend were arrested following the kidnapping of Cynthia Vigil. His trailer home was then stormed and his quote-unquote toy box was discovered, and the horrors that beheld the officers are as follows. A gynecology table located in the center of the room with torture devices, weapons, and sex toys littered all across the area. Wooden contraptions to hold his victims in place as he tortured them. Tapes of David torturing his victims were neatly sorted on a table, all of which contain some of the most disturbing footage to ever exist.
We found that it is extremely convenient to keep 1 or 2 female captives available constantly to satisfy our particular needs. We are very selective when we snatch a girl to use for these purposes.
The walls were plastered with intricate instructions on how to torture and inflict high pain upon people, and the ceiling was a mirror so the victims could watch David pick them apart and murder them. As well as all of this, the FBI found David's diary containing logs of his 50-plus murders of women. Shockingly, David was never actually convicted of murder, despite all the cards being stacked against him in court. The reason for this is because he specifically chose his victims of a low socioeconomic class, such as sex workers and drug abusers. This not only made it harder for police to take his surviving victims seriously, but it also worked for David because these people would go relatively unnoticed if missing. Plus the fact that, as I previously mentioned, all witnesses and victims of David were sedated heavily, so the recounts of their experiences are shaky at best. Despite the fact that David was able to beat his main 2 cases for the attempted murder and torturing of Kelly Garrett and Cynthia Vigil, he was still sentenced to 224 years in prison for the abduction and sexual torture of Angelica Montano, Cynthia Vigil, and Kelly Garrett. His 2 accomplices, his daughter, served 9 years in prison, and his girlfriend was sentenced to 37 years as well. David Ray, his daughter, Jessie Ray, and his girlfriend, Cindy Hendy, are all deplorable humans, and his victims and their families will all have to live with the burden of association forever. David is the embodiment of the devil.